This is a piece that I made for the Asylum in 2019, and I think of it as my Cthulhu Acolyte armour because it's got a lot of tentacle imagery on it. So I'm going to go over how I put this together and various materials that I use, and as you can see it can also be used to summon the forces of darkness, so that's always useful. So if you're going to make something that summons the forces of darkness, where do you start? Well, the most obvious place is EVA Foam, of course, beloved of the Elder Gods. So what I'm doing here is just cutting out the basic shape that I want for the piece in EVA Foam, and I'm then covering it in a layer of fiberglass to give it some strength. This stuff dries very, very hard and very, very rigid, so I like using it to give my foam pieces some strength. What I'm also doing is gluing on some pieces of tube here. These are going to be used to connect some connectors and add some sort of steampunk devices underneath. So at the minute this is looking pretty rough, so what I now need to do is smooth it out. And another favourite material of mine is this stuff, which is commonly known as Bondo, although it does have various brand names. It's car body filler and it's really useful for smoothing stuff out. You can fill in gaps and then sand it down to a smooth finish. So this is something that I use quite frequently when I'm making stuff. So now that I've got the basic shape of my arm piece, what I'm now doing is sculpting some designs on top of it. Now I'm using something called monster clay, and this is like a wax-based clay, so it doesn't dry in the same way as regular water-based clay. I'm also sculpting up a shoulder pad, and I'm using something called Chavant for that, which is an oil-based clay, and that's quite similar to monster clay as well. So what I now need to do is make a mould of these pieces. So what I'm doing is building some cardboard surrounds around them, and I'm then going to pour some silicone rubber over these. The cardboard surround stops the silicone flowing all over the place. So what I'm also doing is adding a layer of fiberglass on top of the silicone rubber as well. That's because when you take the mould off the sculpture it's going to be quite floppy, so you need a hard case to hold it in shape. Well, so there we go, so there's my finished mould and it's got the impression of my sculpture. And there's the one for the shoulder pad as well. It's always quite interesting seeing the negative impression of the sculpture that you've just made. So what I'm now going to do is something that I hadn't tried previously. I'm going to try some cold casting. What that involves is mixing some brass powder in with some resin, and that should allow me to get a nice brass finish to my piece. So I'm brushing some of the powder on the inside of the mould, and I'm also adding some to some resin as well. What I can then do is pour the resin into the mould and let it slowly flow over the interior to pick up the detail. Now that that's dried, it looks quite dull, but the cool thing with this is once you give it a bit of a polish, you can get a really, really nice shine to it, and this looks almost like real metal, so this is a really, really useful technique for making brass pieces. And obviously you can't have a steampunk item without some brass on it. So I've also made an elbow pad, and here's the cast of the shoulder pad as well. So the next step is to make some leather pieces to hold all these bits together. So what I did was to cut out some veg tan leather and dye it to the correct colour. What I'm now doing is trying to piece together a gauntlet. This is quite tricky, getting the spacing right for your fingers, so it took a little bit of experimentation. What I've also done is to make a little mini Cthulhu that I'm going to have in a tube, and this is going to sit in the arm piece. I'm sort of thinking of the mecha glove from Hellboy here. If you look closely at the prop you'll see there's a little frog in a test tube on there. I guess that's where it gets its sort of eldritch power from, so I've sort of had a similar idea in mind for this. So here's a finished piece, and as you can see I've adorned it with various bits of skulls and other steampunk bits and pieces. I've got a pressure gauge in there and various other bits. So there we go, one piece of Cthulhu Acolyte armour. I've made a few gauntlets and arm pieces over the years, so that's allowed me to iron out some of the problems with this previously, and it's definitely a good idea to wear this sort of thing on your off arm. That way you won't be compromised when you're trying to get your wallet out or just trying to have a drink or something like that. Anyway, I hope that was useful and interesting, so hopefully I will see you at the next asylum.